Nathan's life, in many ways, mirrored that of any other 13-year-old boy growing up in a quiet town in the United States. His world was a simple one, revolving around school, weekend outings with his family, and the solace of his room, where he would often lose himself in books or let his mind wander into daydreams about the future. He was neither an exceptional student nor a standout athlete. He was simply Nathan, curious, kind-hearted, and filled with the boundless dreams of youth, untouched by the burdens of adulthood. The modest house on the edge of town where he lived with his family was his refuge, a place of warmth and familiarity that anchored him to the world. His parents, though weary from the demands of daily life, ensured that their children never felt unloved. His mother balanced the responsibilities of home while working part-time at a local store, tirelessly keeping everything in order. His father, a quiet but steady figure, worked hard to provide, doing his best to shield them from the financial difficulties that seemed to loom ever closer like an approaching storm. Despite these struggles, their home was filled with love. Small, cherished moments defined their days. His mother humming softly as she prepared dinner, the comforting aroma of his father's early morning coffee, and the gleeful laughter of his little sister Emily as she played with her favorite stuffed animals. It was a life of simplicity, sometimes burdened by hardship, yet held together by an unbreakable bond of love. Beyond the walls of their home, however, the world was shifting. The news was filled with stories of uncertainty, economic troubles, rising living costs, and a growing sense of unrest that seemed to seep into their small town. The close-knit community they had once known was slowly unraveling. Neighbors who had once exchanged friendly greetings now passed each other in silence, their thoughts weighed down by personal struggles. Nathan, though still young, could sense the change. He saw it in the worry that creased his mother's brow, in the exhausted sighs of his father as he went over their finances late at night. Even at school, he noticed the tension. Friends who had once played together so freely now bickered over small matters. Teachers whispered about budget cuts, their voices tinged with concern. Though Nathan didn't fully understand the complexities of the world, he felt the weight of them pressing in. Still, he found comfort in the small, familiar rituals of home. Family dinners remained sacred, a moment of peace amidst the shifting tides of the world. Every evening, they gathered around the kitchen table, sharing stories, exchanging laughter, and for a little while, forgetting about the uncertainties that lay just beyond their front door. That night was no different. Winter's chill crept through the window panes, but the house was warm with the scent of his mother's homemade stew. Emily sat across from him, swinging her legs as she animatedly recounted a tale from Sunday school. Their father, despite the fatigue in his eyes, smiled at her enthusiasm. Nathan felt safe, wrapped in the familiar comfort of family, unaware that this moment would be their last together as they had always known it. The evening had begun like any other, filled with warmth, the scent of dinner, and the soft cadence of conversation filling the air. Nathan loved these moments, these fleeting respites where the troubles of the outside world seemed distant. His mother placed a steaming bowl of stew in front of him. His father reached for the salt, and Emily, ever lively, was mid-sentence in an animated retelling of her Sunday school story, her small hands waving with enthusiasm. Nathan listened, a small smile playing on his lips, soaking in the moment. Then, everything changed in an instant. A sharp gasp escaped Nathan's lips as his vision swam. A crushing pressure settled over his chest, stealing the breath from his lungs. His body tensed, his limbs locking in place as an overwhelming, disorienting force pulled him under, like being swept away by an unseen current. The room blurred, sounds faded, and then, darkness. The chair beneath him scraped loudly against the wooden floor as his body crumpled. The spoon he had been holding slipped from his fingers, clattering against the table before rolling onto the ground. His mother's scream shattered the moment. Nathan. The warmth of their home was replaced by sheer panic. His father leaped from his seat, rushing to his side. Emily's small hands trembled as she covered her mouth, her wide eyes frozen in shock. "Call an ambulance," his father shouted, his voice thick with fear. His mother, hands shaking uncontrollably, fumbled with her phone, struggling to dial. The room, once filled with the sounds of laughter and warmth, was now filled with desperation. Nathan lay motionless on the floor, his skin alarmingly pale, his lips tinged with blue. His chest did not rise. He did not stir. His father knelt beside him, hands pressing against Nathan's small frame, searching desperately for a sign, anything, any indication that his son was still there. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind racing through every possible action, every silent, frantic prayer. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Then, the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Dad, his heart. It stopped. The words came out barely a whisper, but they struck with a force that shattered everything. His mother let out a heart-wrenching cry, a raw, guttural sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the universe. The phone slipped from her trembling hands, her entire body trembling as she desperately cradled her son's lifeless form in her arms. "No, no, no," she sobbed, her voice laced with disbelief and agony. "Not my baby." It was as if the world had come crashing down around her, her pain so immense, so incomprehensible, it was as though she were being torn apart from the inside out. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every second felt like an eternity. The room was filled with the anguished cries of a mother losing her child, with the frantic, desperate pleas of a father urging his son to wake up, to come back, as though sheer willpower could force life to return. And then, there was little Emily, the youngest, kneeling beside them, her tiny hands clasped in prayer, whispering the words she had only just learned, a desperate plea for a miracle, though she didn't yet fully understand the weight of the moment. And then, just as the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the air, Daniel's body remained still, 9 long, agonizing minutes of silence. 9 minutes where his family was trapped in a nightmare of fear, helplessness, and sorrow. 9 minutes where the world around them seemed to fall apart, and yet they didn't know that Daniel was already somewhere beyond their reach. Somewhere far away. The silence was not just the absence of sound. It was something deeper, something infinite. A vast, empty chasm that seemed to stretch beyond the limits of human comprehension. Daniel, though, felt no fear. Instead, he felt something he had never known before: weightlessness. As though he was suspended in the air, untethered from his body, floating effortlessly. He saw it, his own body below him, lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by the chaotic grief of his family. His mother clutched him desperately, her body racked with sobs that tore through the air like jagged knives. His father, face contorted in agony, pressed desperately on Daniel's chest, trying to revive him with CPR, but the desperation in his eyes told a story of defeat. And Emily, poor, innocent Emily, kneeling beside them, her little hands clenched in a tight prayer, whispering the only word she could, pleading for a miracle that, at that moment, seemed so far out of reach. It should have been terrifying. But it wasn't. Instead, Daniel was enveloped in an overwhelming sense of calm, a peace so profound it defied all logic. It was as though some unseen force was cradling him, lifting him higher, away from the heartbreak below. The frantic voices of his family began to fade into the distance, like the echoes of a dream, until they were nothing more than faint murmurs lost in a vast space. And then, as though summoned by some divine call, a gentle pull tugged at him, a force so tender yet undeniable. Ahead of him, a golden light appeared, stretching before him like an endless tunnel. It wasn't harsh, it wasn't blinding. It was warm, radiant, filled with an otherworldly glow that felt like the embrace of the universe itself. It called to him, drawing him forward, into the unknown. The whispers began softly, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, growing clearer with every passing moment. "You are not finished yet. Remember what you see." The words resonated deep within him, vibrating through his soul. They felt ancient, as though his very essence had always known them, even before his mind could fully grasp their meaning. Without hesitation, Daniel found himself drifting forward, drawn to the light. His old life, the world he had known, his family, the house where his body still lay, began to dissolve, like the fading remnants of a dream, slipping away as something new, something unimaginable, began to take shape. The golden light stretched endlessly before him, filling the space with an unshakable serenity. It wasn't just beautiful. It was a homecoming, a sense of belonging so deep and so pure that it overwhelmed every fiber of his being. The peace here was not just the absence of fear, it was something more. It was the feeling of being loved beyond measure, beyond understanding. A love so vast, so encompassing, that it left him breathless, as if it were the very air he breathed. There was no pain here, no sorrow, no fear, only peace. And for a moment, Daniel wanted to stay forever, to bask in the warmth of this place, to let it fill him. But deep within him, something was stirring. A realization, a sense of purpose that he couldn't yet explain. His journey, it seemed, was far from over. As he ventured further into the golden realm, a presence began to take form before him. At first, it was nothing more than a light, a brilliance so pure, so radiant that it seemed to pulse with life itself. But as Daniel focused on it, the light slowly took shape, becoming a figure of indescribable beauty and power. It was Jesus. Daniel's soul recognized him instantly, not just because of his appearance, though he was clothed in light beyond earthly comprehension, but because of the way his very being radiated love, peace, and warmth. It was as though the entire realm itself emanated from him, a constant flow of unconditional love. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Daniel was overwhelmed. His heart swelled with a love so intense, so indescribable, that it left him speechless. He wanted to fall to his knees, to cry, to run into the arms of the one who stood before him. But Jesus simply smiled, a smile that seemed to encompass the entire universe, a smile that spoke of infinite understanding, love, and grace. "Daniel," he said, his voice both powerful and gentle, filling the very core of Daniel's being. "You have been chosen to deliver an important message." As the words left Jesus' lips, images began flooding Daniel's mind, visions of a world in turmoil, a world ravaged by devastation. Cities were swallowed by flames, forests reduced to ash, and waters rose and engulfed entire towns. The sky itself seemed to groan as storms raged across the earth. It was chaos, destruction, a world on the brink of disaster. Daniel trembled, a deep unease filling his heart. "Why are you showing me this?" His voice, small and fragile, trembled with fear and confusion as he struggled to understand the gravity of what he was witnessing. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, and as they focused, he saw the tear-streaked face of his mother leaning over him. Her sobs were desperate, but there was a tremor of relief in her voice when she whispered again, "You're back." The sterile smell of the hospital filled his nostrils, the cold, harsh lights overhead too bright for him to fully comprehend. His body, once so lifeless, now pulsed with an almost overwhelming sensation of being alive. Yet, it wasn't just the physical ache that consumed him, it was the weight of the truth he carried in his heart. His gaze drifted around the room, catching glimpses of his father, standing by the door, eyes wide with disbelief, and little Emily, clutching her hands together as if still praying for him to breathe. But all that registered was the knowledge he had received, the message he was meant to carry. "Mom." "Dad," his voice was raw, wand peak, but the words pushed through anyway. His chest tightened as the gravity of what he had experienced, what he had seen, began to settle in. He had been somewhere else, somewhere beyond time, beyond pain, and yet, he had been entrusted with a message so profound that it made the world seem smaller, more fragile. I saw him," he murmured, barely able to speak the words aloud. His mother froze, her hands shaking as she held his face in her palms. "Saw who, Daniel? Who did you see?" "Jesus," he whispered, as the tears threatened to spill. "I saw Jesus," he said. "He said the world has lost its way, that it has forgotten love, faith, and unity." And his throat constricted as he tried to form the words. He said, "There's still time, but only if we turn back to each other. Turn back to love." His mother's breath hitched in disbelief, but she held him close, her tears soaking into his hair. "I don't understand, Daniel. How are you saying these things?" Daniel tried to sit up, despite the heavy ache in his body. "I remember everything, Mom. Everything he showed me. It was horrible, but it was also beautiful. It was like nothing I've ever known." His voice trembled as he spoke of the destruction, the grief, the broken world he had seen, images that had burned into his mind. He felt them still, that gnawing fear, but now, it was tempered by the certainty that what he had seen was a call. A call for change, for redemption. He gripped his mother's hand with what strength he had left. "He told me to tell everyone, to tell them to return to love, to faith, to one another, or it will be too late." Tears streamed down his mother's face as she looked at him, a mix of awe and fear in her eyes. "But you're just a boy, Daniel. How can you?" "I don't know," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of it. "But I know what I saw. I know what he said." His father, still standing by the door, finally stepped forward, kneeling beside the bed. "Daniel, you came back for a reason. We're not going to let this moment slip away. Whatever this message is, we will share it. We'll help you tell the world." The room fell silent as the family huddled together, their hearts heavy but hopeful. They knew this was just the beginning. The world outside, the world they had known, would never be the same. And neither would they. For Daniel, the journey had only just begun. The message that had been entrusted to him now burned in his soul, a fire that couldn't be ignored. He had returned from the brink of death, not by chance, but for a purpose. And no matter how small or uncertain he felt in the face of such a monumental task, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had been given a second chance, to speak, to teach, to spread the message that love, faith, and unity were the only way forward. And he would not rest until he had done everything he could to answer that call. His mother's hands trembled against his skin, her fingers brushing his cheek as if afraid that he might vanish if she let go. "Still time for what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with emotion. Daniel swallowed hard, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from the urgency of the message that burned within him. He had seen it all, the destruction, the suffering, the shadows creeping into the hearts of mankind. But he had also seen the light, the hope that remained, flickering like a candle in the dark. "There's still time to change," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Still time to turn back, to love, to faith, to unity." He closed his eyes for a moment, the memories of his vision flashing in his mind like fire and thunder. Cities in ruins, the cries of the innocent, the sky darkened by smoke and despair. He had seen families torn apart, neighbors who had once shared kindness now blinded by hate. "If we don't, everything will fall apart. Jesus said so himself." His father exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. His usual calm, composed demeanor had been shattered, leaving behind only confusion and unease. "Son, you were dead for 9 minutes. Maybe what you saw was just—" "It wasn't just my mind playing tricks," Daniel interrupted, his hands gripping the blanket over him as if grounding himself in this reality. "Dad, I felt it. I felt him. His touch, his love, his power." His voice dropped, filled with an almost reverent awe. "I shouldn't be here, but he sent me back." His mother's breath hitched. Her face, pale and tear-streaked, betrayed the war waging within her. The struggle between faith and fear, between hope and the overwhelming weight of loss she had just suffered and miraculously reversed. "For what?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's gaze was steady, unwavering. "To tell people, to warn them, to remind them." Silence settled over the room, heavy and thick. The doctors exchanged hesitant glances, their scientists unable to explain what had just happened. The machines had flatlined. He had been gone. And yet, he was here. Strong. Alive. Emily, still clinging to their mother's sleeve, finally spoke, her small voice breaking through the tension. "Danny, is Jesus mad at us?" Daniel's expression softened, and he shook his head. "No, Em. He's not mad, but he's sad. Sad that we've forgotten how to love each other. Sad that we're letting fear and anger win." He looked at her, at his parents, at the doctors still standing in stunned silence. But he also said it's not too late. If we choose love, if we choose to turn back to him, we can change what's coming. His father remained still, his face unreadable. Then finally, he let out a slow breath, stepping closer, his large hand resting gently on Daniel's shoulder. "And you believe this?" Daniel met his father's gaze, no hesitation in his eyes. "With everything in me." His mother wiped at her tears, her lips trembling as she exhaled. "Then we'll listen," she whispered. "We'll listen, Daniel." The weight in his chest lifted slightly. He had taken the first step. But deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. His mind was still reeling from the visions, the burning cities, the cries of those who had lost everything, the world divided and crumbling under its hatred. But among the darkness, there had been light. Jesus had shown him the path forward, a way to mend what was broken. Love, faith, and unity. Three simple yet powerful forces that could turn back the tide of destruction. But how was he, a 15-year-old boy, supposed to deliver that message to a world so lost? The doubt clawed at him, whispering that he was just a kid and that no one would listen. But then he remembered the warmth of Jesus' hand over his heart, the surge of strength and love that had filled him when he spoke. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He wasn't alone. A sudden knock at the door jolted everyone from their thoughts. A nurse peeked in hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but, Daniel, there's someone here to see you." His mother turned, wiping away her tears. "Who?" The nurse hesitated, glancing back into the hallway before stepping aside. A man entered. His face lined with age, but his eyes filled with warmth and curiosity. He wore a simple black suit, a cross hanging from a chain around his neck. A priest. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. "Daniel," the man said gently, his voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of something deeper, understanding, perhaps even purpose. "I heard what happened. The nurses, they say it's a miracle, that you came back from death." He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Daniel's. "And that you spoke of Jesus." Daniel sat up a little straighter. "Yes, Father, I did." The priest nodded, pulling a chair closer to sit beside the bed. "Would you tell me what he said?" Daniel exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of his blanket. He had just relived the moment for his family, but something told him this was important. That this man, this priest, was supposed to hear it, too. So, he told him. He spoke of the visions, the flames, the division, the warning of what was to come. But more importantly, he spoke of the love, of the hope, of the path Jesus had shown him, the message he had entrusted him with. The priest listened intently, never interrupting, his hands folded together in thought. When Daniel finally finished, the room was silent once more. The priest exhaled deeply, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile broke across his face. "The world needs to hear this," he said simply. "And I believe, Daniel, that God has chosen you to be his messenger." Daniel felt his breath hitch. The weight of the words settled over him, heavy yet not crushing. A responsibility, yes, but not a burden. Tears welled up in his mother's eyes, her fragile hand trembling as she gently reached out to touch his face. Her thumb, soft yet full of emotion, brushed across his cheek as she whispered, "Still time for what, baby?" Daniel's throat tightened, his chest heavy with the weight of everything he needed to say. To turn back, to return to God, to love again, to forgive before it's too late. His words hung in the air, thick with the urgency of a truth he could no longer ignore. It was a truth that felt like a desperate plea, like a call to save what little was left of their fractured hearts. His father, ever the stoic, shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched tight, his face a mask of unreadable emotions. The silence between them was suffocating, broken only by his mother's quiet sob, the sound of her pain escaping as she pressed a trembling hand over her lips. And then, from the quietest corner of the room, Emily spoke, her voice barely a whisper, but cutting through the heavy tension like a dagger of innocence. "Did Jesus say we were going to be okay?" Daniel's heart shattered at the question, the purity of her words slicing through him. He turned toward her, his eyes searching the depth of her big, hopeful gaze, and he felt a surge of love mixed with sorrow. "He said it's up to us," he answered softly, his voice catching in his throat. How could he explain to her the weight of that truth, when she was so young and full of hope, still believing in a world that wasn't yet broken? The days that followed Daniel's return were nothing short of miraculous. Yet, they felt like a trial, a reckoning. His survival, the improbable miracle that had brought him back, spread like wildfire, first through the hospital, then through their town, and soon beyond, touching lives he had never imagined. People came, not just driven by curiosity, but by something they couldn't name, an intangible force, a whisper of something divine in his presence. Daniel never tried to convince them, never fought against the ones who doubted. He didn't feel the need to prove what he had seen or lived through. Instead, he spoke the truth Jesus had planted in his heart, a truth that burned with the intensity of a wildfire. "It's not too late," he would say, his voice firm yet gentle, a quiet strength resonating in every word. "We can still change what's coming, but we must love. We must forgive. We must return to faith." Some people mocked him, dismissing him as just another broken soul clinging to a false hope. Others were moved, tears filling their eyes as his words sunk deep into their hearts. But there were others, those who had been searching, those who had lost their way, who found in Daniel's message a spark, a glimmer of light that reignited something inside them. They hadn't known how much they needed to hear those words until they were spoken. His mother was the first to change, to truly open her heart again. She began to pray, not just in moments of desperation, but with a newfound hope, with gratitude that had been absent for so long. She didn't just pray for things to get better. She prayed with a belief that she could still make things better. Daniel saw it in her eyes, the flicker of a love she had buried, now coming to life once more. His father, ever the skeptic, remained quiet, more reflective than ever. He no longer argued, dismissed. He spent long hours in silence, his heart slowly unraveling the walls he had built around it. Watching, listening, wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to this faith after all. And then there was Emily, sweet, innocent Emily, who never let go of Daniel's hand. She clung to him as if her very soul depended on it, whispering little prayers under her breath. It was as though she understood now, with a wisdom far beyond her years, that heaven was listening, that love, faith, and forgiveness could still make all the difference. Daniel didn't know what the future held, but he believed, with every ounce of his being, that the time for change was now. It was never too late to love, never too late to forgive. And above all, it was never too late to return to faith, to a God who would always be there, waiting with open arms. As we come to the end of this journey through Daniel's story, we're reminded of the incredible power of love, forgiveness, and faith. Through his words, we've learned that it's never too late to change, to return to the things that matter most, and to take responsibility for the life we want to lead. But what about you? What has resonated with you the most? What lesson have you taken away from this story, and how will you bring it into your own life? Take a moment to reflect and share with us in the comments below. What is one thing you've learned today that you will put into practice moving forward? If you found this video meaningful, please leave your comment below, give it a thumbs up, share it with those who might benefit from this message, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content that inspires and empowers. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching, and we can't wait to see you in the next video.